Hello, miladies of inestimable value. The strongest leaders are the ones who never applied for the position. That's not just a clever line. It's a cold fact history keeps proving. From Joan of Arc to Rosa Parks, the figures who shifted entire movements didn't stand up and say, "Vote for me." They simply lived their truth and people couldn't help but fall in line. Now, here's the twist. Sigma females are wired the exact same way. They don't audition for leadership, yet somehow they end up running the show without even realizing it. It's unsettling for traditional power players because the Sigma female doesn't bark orders, doesn't kiss rings, and doesn't care about the spotlight. While everyone else is campaigning to be noticed, she's the one quietly reading the room, sipping her coffee, and accidentally making the so-called alphas look like interns on their first day. This isn't charisma in the glittery, motivational poster sense. It's gravity. And the terrifyingly funny part? She doesn't even want the job. But like Wi-Fi, everyone starts depending on her presence the second she enters a space. So why do Sigma females end up leading without trying? Because the harder they avoid the throne, the more everyone else shoves them onto it. Number one, she doesn't inherit followers, she absorbs them. When a Sigma female absorbs followers, it's not the same thing as gathering a crowd or building a fan club. She doesn't recruit people, she doesn't beg for attention, and she doesn't hand out promises like a politician. What she does is much stranger and far more powerful. She radiates a kind of energy that makes people drift toward her without realizing it. It isn't about charm or persuasion. It's resonance. People start to notice that when they're around her, they feel sharper, calmer, or even a little braver. That feeling sticks, and once someone experiences it, they don't really want to go back to the noise of following anyone else. Traditional leaders collect followers the way a CEO collects employees. They dangle incentives, create structures, and remind people who's in charge. Sigma females don't operate that way. They're not transactional, which is why their influence feels more permanent. You don't sign up to follow them. You just realize at some point that your behavior, your choices, and even your standards have shifted in her direction. It's almost embarrassing because no one can quite point out the moment it happened. One day you're just watching her do her own thing, and the next day you've unconsciously adjusted to her wavelength. The most unsettling part for others is that she doesn't even try to keep people. She isn't performing for approval, and she's not building a brand of leadership. If you walk away, she won't chase. But that's exactly why people stay. Her independence makes her influence feel authentic, not engineered. Followers of Sigma females don't feel managed. They feel aligned. That's the difference. And unlike leaders who burn out trying to maintain authority, Sigma females don't need to. Their strength is self-sustaining because it comes from who they are, not from external recognition. The result is a loyalty that lasts longer, runs deeper, and carries more weight than traditional leadership ever could. People don't follow her because she asked. They follow because something about her presence quietly rewires their sense of direction. By the time they notice, they've already been absorbed. Number two, she turns not leading into the highest form of leadership. When a Sigma female doesn't chase leadership, something fascinating happens. She ends up embodying the purest form of it. Most leaders are busy projecting strength, selling visions, or managing people's perceptions. They need the position to validate their authority. But a Sigma female flips that equation. She doesn't seek control, she doesn't campaign for loyalty, and she doesn't stand on a pedestal demanding obedience. Instead, she becomes the standard people naturally align with, because her influence feels uncorrupted by ego. It's leadership stripped of performance. People can sense when power is being forced, and that usually triggers resistance. No matter how charismatic or commanding someone seems, there's always a part of the group silently questioning their motives. With a Sigma female, that doubt doesn't exist because there's no performance to distrust. She's not leading to fill a void inside herself. She's not trying to dominate anyone, and she's not desperate to prove something. Her lack of agenda is exactly what makes her presence feel so trustworthy. People follow her because it feels like the most authentic path, not because they're told it is. What's even more intriguing is that she doesn't confuse leadership with control. Most so-called leaders spend their energy managing outcomes, but she focuses on staying true to her own direction. That self-possession is contagious. Others see it and instinctively want to move in the same current. It's not about orders or strategies, it's about alignment. She turns leadership from a title into an atmosphere, and everyone who comes close ends up breathing it in. This is why Sigma females often destabilize traditional hierarchies without lifting a finger. Their refusal to play the leadership game exposes how artificial most leadership actually is. While others are locked in competition for power, she bypasses the game entirely, and people begin to realize that real influence doesn't come from the throne. It comes from the one person who doesn't care about sitting on it. That's why the harder she avoids the role, the more she becomes the only one people are truly willing to follow. Her leadership doesn't feel imposed, it feels inevitable. Number 3. She turns competitiveness into pointlessness. When a Sigma female moves through life, competition loses its meaning. She isn't wired to obsess over who's ahead, who's winning, or who's trending at the top. Instead, she creates her own rhythm and stays in it so fully that the traditional scoreboard becomes irrelevant. This unnerves people who thrive on rivalry because suddenly the game they've been exhausting themselves with looks childish compared to her calm focus. She doesn't announce that she's above competition, but her refusal to play exposes how desperate and hollow the chase for validation really is. What makes this powerful is that her results still speak for themselves. She achieves, she grows, she succeeds, but it's never about beating someone else. And when others see her rise without fighting for first place, they start questioning why they're running themselves ragged chasing shallow victories. Her presence becomes a quiet mirror, showing them that competing for approval or dominance is a hamster wheel, spinning endlessly, but going nowhere. The effect is disarming. Rivals lose their edge because you can't beat someone who doesn't care about the race. You can't outshine someone who isn't even standing under the same spotlight. While everyone else is clawing for recognition, she's busy mastering her own craft, building her own world, and living by her own rules. That kind of focus makes competition not just pointless, but laughably small in comparison. Over time, people naturally start adjusting to her way of operating. They slow down, rethink their goals, and align with her rhythm instead of trying to outrun her. It's not submission, it's realization. They see that true strength isn't about constantly measuring yourself against others, but about becoming so self-defined that no one else's scoreboard matters. In that sense, the Sigma female doesn't win the competition. She dissolves it. By refusing to play, she proves that the only real power is self-mastery, and that's a game she always dominates without ever competing. Number 4. Her disinterest forces respect. She doesn't chase validation. A Sigma female's disinterest is not passive, it's powerful. Most people are conditioned to seek validation, to flatter, to prove themselves worthy of attention. They're used to being begged for recognition, used to others bending and performing to win approval. When she doesn't play that game, it unsettles everyone. Her refusal to chase attention creates a vacuum. Suddenly, she becomes the rare presence that people want acknowledgement from, and that scarcity is what makes her influence undeniable. It isn't arrogance. She doesn't act superior, and she doesn't deliberately withhold herself. She simply doesn't have the hunger most people operate with. That absence of need is what forces respect, because you can't control or manipulate someone who doesn't crave your approval. She's immune to the hooks others rely on, and when people see they can't bait her, their only option is to elevate her. The shift is subtle but undeniable. At first, people may feel offended by her indifference, even threatened by it. But over time, that discomfort turns into admiration, because deep down, everyone wants to be that untouchable. They realize that while they're busy exhausting themselves to get noticed, she's the one holding power by not caring whether she's noticed at all. Soon, her acknowledgement becomes a kind of social currency. A glance, a word, even her simple presence begins to mean more than the noisy approval of anyone else. Without trying, she ends up dictating the social hierarchy. People measure their own worth against whether she has given them attention. That's how her disinterest flips the entire dynamic. Instead of her chasing others, others chase her. This isn't strategy, and that's why it works so effectively. She's not running some psychological trick. Her indifference comes from self-possession, from not needing external validation to feel complete. And because true independence is so rare, people can't help but respect it, even when they don't understand it. That's the paradox of the Sigma female. By not seeking power, she ends up with more of it than anyone else. Number 5, her curiosity makes her appear all-knowing. Her curiosity works like a spotlight in dark corners where most people are too timid to look. While others stay quiet to avoid embarrassment, she asks the blunt questions that strip away false confidence. It isn't about showing off intelligence, it's about her hunger to truly understand. That willingness to confront the unknown earns her insights others never reach. And when she connects those insights, she naturally looks like she sees further than everyone else. People mistake it for foresight or genius, when in reality, it's just her refusal to censor curiosity. Without trying to posture as a visionary, she ends up shaping the vision everyone else relies on. The same principle carries into how she influences people. She doesn't waste energy barking orders or forcing compliance. Instead, she sets her own standards, lives by them, and lets the results speak louder than commands ever could. People around her notice the calm discipline, the consistency, and the lack of performance. They begin imitating her habits, not because she told them to, but because it feels natural. That quiet influence is far more powerful than authority because it doesn't provoke resistance. No one feels controlled. They feel inspired. Over time, her curiosity and her example fuse into a leadership style that doesn't look like leadership at all. She uncovers truths that others missed, and she embodies a way of living that others unconsciously adopt. The more she refuses to instruct, the more people follow her model. It snowballs without her needing to raise her voice or demand loyalty. By simply asking the questions others avoid and living out the answers she uncovers, she ends up guiding entire groups. And that's the paradox. She doesn't intend to lead, but through curiosity and example, she becomes the very figure people orbit and imitate. Number 6, she makes influence look accidental. A Sigma female's influence never feels staged, and that's why it's so effective. Most leaders can't resist flaunting their authority, reminding people who's in charge, or showcasing how much sway they have. But she doesn't need to brag, because her presence already carries weight. She doesn't chase followers, she doesn't sell an image, and she doesn't draw attention to the times she shapes outcomes. Instead, her influence comes across as something that just happens, like gravity, quietly pulling things into place. People are far more willing to trust someone who isn't constantly advertising their power. Bragging always raises suspicion about motives, but when she moves with subtlety, people assume her actions are genuine, not manipulative. They see her decisions as rooted in principle, not ego. That difference is everything. Influence feels less like domination and more like natural alignment. People don't feel pushed, they feel guided. And that sensation builds a loyalty no forceful leader can manufacture. Her influence also endures because it doesn't burn out. Leaders who rely on displays of control must keep proving themselves, louder and harder each time. She never plays that exhausting game. Since her authority doesn't come from performance, it doesn't fade when the spotlight shifts. Even when she's silent, her impact lingers. People still weigh her perspective, copy her choices, and adjust their behavior in her absence. That's not control, it's resonance. The irony is she doesn't even intend for it to look this way. She's not hiding her power, she simply doesn't care to showcase it. That nonchalance convinces people she must be acting from authenticity rather than ambition. The less she tries to influence, the more undeniable her influence becomes. And that's the paradox that keeps people circling back to her. Leadership without demand, authority without noise, power without the performance. Number 7. She's unavailable in a way leaders can't be. A Sigma female's power lies in her scarcity. Traditional leaders are everywhere, constantly speaking, posting, showing up, and fighting to stay visible. Their influence depends on being seen, and because of that, they often dilute their presence. The more available they are, the less weight their words and actions carry. A Sigma female operates differently. She doesn't flood the room, the group, or the conversation. She withholds herself, not out of arrogance, but because she simply doesn't feel the need to be constantly on display. That very absence is what creates mystique. People begin to notice that when she does appear, it feels significant. Her words land harder, her choices seem sharper, and her silence in between makes others pay closer attention. She becomes the rare voice people actually listen to instead of background noise. It's the same principle that makes a limited edition valuable. Scarcity amplifies worth. By being unavailable, she makes her presence carry more weight than those who try to dominate every moment. This limited access also unsettles people, because most are used to being able to predict and reach leaders on demand. With her, there's no guarantee. That unpredictability makes her harder to control and, paradoxically, more respected. People value her not only for what she gives, but for the fact that she doesn't give it freely to everyone all the time. Her boundaries become part of her authority. Over time, her scarcity builds loyalty rather than resentment. Instead of resenting her distance, people crave her acknowledgement even more because it's rare. And when she chooses to engage, it feels intentional, never obligatory. That's why her leadership doesn't drain her, it strengthens her. She doesn't perform visibility to hold power. She uses absence to magnify it. Leaders who crave constant attention eventually fade into the noise. But the Sigma female stands apart because her unavailability makes her unforgettable. People don't just notice her, they anticipate her, and that anticipation is where her quiet dominance lives. Number 8, she commands attention by not commanding it. A Sigma female never tries to steal the spotlight, yet it has a strange way of finding her. In a world where most people are performing, speaking louder, exaggerating their gestures, forcing themselves to be noticed, she does the opposite. She stays grounded, calm, and uninterested in competing for eyes. That refusal to perform creates a stark contrast, and people can't help but look her way. Ironically, her quiet composure drowns out the loudest voice in the room because authenticity is louder than noise. The psychology behind it is simple. Performance is predictable. When someone is clearly trying to command attention, people instinctively filter it out as just another act. But when someone isn't performing, their presence feels real, and realness is magnetic. She doesn't push herself forward, yet others lean toward her naturally, sensing something different in the way she carries herself. Her silence becomes sharper than speeches, her stillness more noticeable than movement. The effect snowballs. The more others see that she isn't competing for attention, the more they feel drawn to her. She creates intrigue by subtraction, not addition. People begin to wonder why she's so composed, what she's observing, what she knows that others don't. That curiosity pulls focus toward her without her lifting a finger. This is why her influence feels so unshakable. Because she never fights for attention, she never loses it. People don't view her as another voice in the crowd. They view her as the one person who doesn't need the crowd at all. That independence rewrites the social dynamic. The spotlight doesn't shine on her because she asked for it. It bends toward her because her lack of performance makes everyone else look staged. Her command is paradoxical. By not commanding, she becomes impossible to ignore. It's not dominance in the loud, flashy sense. It's dominance that creeps in quietly until she's the one everyone is watching, wondering, and following. Number 9. She doesn't give directions, she sets examples. A Sigma female doesn't waste time telling people what to do because she knows words are cheap and authority built on orders rarely lasts. Instead, she lives by her own standards, quietly setting an example that others end up copying without even realizing it. There's no speech, no grand announcement, no follow-me energy, just her moving through life with a level of consistency and authenticity that makes people question their own choices. And when they see the results she produces, imitation feels natural, almost inevitable. The beauty of this kind of influence is that it never feels forced. People don't experience her presence as pressure, and that's why they don't resist it. Instead of feeling commanded, they feel inspired. That difference is everything. Traditional leaders provoke pushback because nobody likes being told what to do, but her influence slides past defenses. It's not about compliance, it's about alignment. People want to match her rhythm because it feels smarter, calmer, and more powerful than the chaos they're used to. Her power lies in the fact that she doesn't even try to lead. She operates in her own lane, focused on her own standards, and people slowly realize that imitating her brings them better outcomes than following loud leaders who rely on control. This quiet chain reaction snowballs. One person copies her discipline, another copies her independence, and soon entire groups shift without her lifting a finger. She doesn't manage them, she rewires them simply by being herself. What makes this so effective is that it's rooted in authenticity. She isn't performing example setting as a strategy. It's her default way of existing. That's why it feels real and people can tell. She proves through action what others try to prove through orders, and that's the kind of leadership people actually trust. In the end, she doesn't create followers by directing them. She creates new leaders by showing what it looks like to stand firmly on your own. That's how she ends up leading without ever commanding. Number 10. She doesn't sell herself, which makes her irresistible. A Sigma. Female's power comes from her refusal to sell herself. In a world where people constantly promote their achievements, post their wins, and signal competence at every turn, she does none of that. She doesn't brag, she doesn't explain, and she doesn't try to convince anyone of her worth. And paradoxically, that's exactly what makes her magnetic. When others are busy shouting their value, her silence and self-assuredness stand out. She becomes the scarce resource people notice, desire, and want to be close to. Not because she demands it, but simply because she exists on a different level. This lack of self-promotion creates an aura of mystery. People don't know all her capabilities, and they can't predict her next move. That uncertainty makes her presence more compelling than anyone who is constantly on display. Competence that doesn't need validation commands attention naturally. When someone doesn't feel the need to prove themselves, their value is assumed. And in human psychology, assumed value is often more persuasive than advertised value. What's fascinating is that people start competing subtly to align with her, not because she told them to, but because proximity feels advantageous. Others instinctively recognize that being near someone self-contained and capable will elevate their own standards. They unconsciously adjust to her rhythm, her mindset, and her energy. Her influence spreads quietly without her orchestrating it, and her lack of self-promotion becomes a form of authority in itself. This also protects her from the pitfalls of conventional leadership. By not selling herself, she avoids jealousy, manipulation, and the constant need to prove herself. Her power remains intact because it isn't tied to perception. It's tied to reality. People are drawn to her because she doesn't ask them to be. They see her existence and respond. That's why a Sigma female becomes irresistible. The very act of refusing to market herself turns her into something rare, something worth noticing, and someone impossible to overlook. Her silence doesn't diminish her. It amplifies her presence, making influence effortless and naturally magnetic. Number 11. She breaks rules without preaching about it. A Sigma female doesn't waste time talking about breaking rules or promoting unconventional thinking. She simply lives it. While others spend energy preaching philosophies or convincing people to think differently, she quietly ignores limitations and follows her own instincts. The result is powerful because it's authentic. People see outcomes, not slogans, and outcomes speak louder than words. They don't feel lectured. They feel compelled to pay attention because the results are undeniable. Her methods often appear unorthodox, but they work. She doesn't need approval or validation to test boundaries. She tests them because it's natural to her way of operating. And when her approach succeeds, people start noticing patterns. They see that her methods solve problems, cut through unnecessary complexity, or reveal opportunities others overlooked. Without her ever instructing them, they begin adapting. They reorganize themselves, their priorities, and even their strategies around what she's doing, because the proof is right in front of them. What makes this form of influence extraordinary is that it's completely passive from her perspective. She doesn't position herself as a leader or innovator. She simply acts in alignment with her own standards. Yet the world around her can't help but respond. The people in her orbit adopt her techniques, emulate her thinking, and ultimately follow her lead, all without her ever intending to direct them. This creates a ripple effect. Rules that once seemed rigid start bending naturally, and the culture around her shifts subtly toward her approach. Others internalize her lessons through observation rather than instruction, which makes the change far more durable. Because she isn't preaching, there's no resistance. People don't feel controlled, they feel enlightened by what they witness. In essence, she teaches without teaching, leads without leading, and reshapes systems without announcing her authority. Her disregard for convention isn't rebellion. It's a quiet form of mastery, and everyone around her can't help but reorganize their thinking around it. That's how she turns rule-breaking into influence, effortlessly and invisibly. Number 12. Her standards act as a silent filter. A Sigma female's standards are invisible yet unmistakable. She doesn't announce what she expects and she doesn't demand respect, but the way she carries herself sets a clear baseline for behavior and effort. Mediocrity stands out around her, not because she points it out, but because she simply refuses to engage with it. People quickly notice that the usual shortcuts, excuses, and laziness don't work in her presence, and that quiet boundary becomes a standard they instinctively measure themselves against. Her refusal to tolerate half-effort or dishonesty doesn't feel confrontational, it feels natural. She doesn't scold or lecture, she just operates in her own lane with uncompromising clarity. That creates subtle pressure on everyone around her. People begin to notice where they fall short, and without realizing it, start leveling up to meet the tone she sets. The effect is almost gravitational. The higher her standards, the more others adjust to orbit her frame. What makes this influence extraordinary is that it isn't overt. She doesn't lead through fear or commands, but through presence. The people who recognize her quality instinctively want to rise to it. They follow her example, not because they are told to, but because aligning with her standards feels like the only rational choice. In doing so, she reshapes social and professional dynamics without ever taking overt control. Her silent filter also protects her energy. By refusing to tolerate mediocrity, she naturally distances herself from those who drain focus or spread negativity. Only those willing to meet her unspoken baseline remain close, which concentrates talent, loyalty, and respect around her. This creates a self-sustaining ecosystem. People rise to her level, and in turn, her influence grows organically. Ultimately, her standards become a subtle yet powerful tool of leadership. She doesn't have to speak, insist, or manipulate. Her presence and the quiet boundaries she enforces do all the work. People are drawn to her, influenced by her, and reshaped by her, all because she simply refuses to accept anything less than what she herself embodies. Sigma females don't try to lead, and that's exactly why they end up leading everyone. Their influence isn't loud, performative, or manufactured. It's subtle, magnetic, and unavoidable. They don't demand respect, they command it through presence. They don't give orders, they set examples that others instinctively follow. They don't compete, sell themselves, or chase validation, yet people naturally align with their standards, curiosity, and authenticity. Every choice they make, every boundary they hold, every quiet rebellion they embody becomes a blueprint for others without them ever intending to lead. Their leadership feels effortless because it is. It doesn't drain them or demand recognition, and that makes it infinitely more powerful than the kind of authority built on ego, noise, or coercion. People are drawn to them not out of obligation, but because their presence inspires alignment, trust, and transformation. By refusing to chase the throne, they rewrite the rules of influence entirely, turning silence into gravity, scarcity into value, independence into guidance. In the end, Sigma females prove that true leadership isn't about holding a title, issuing commands, or performing for attention. It's about living fully on your own terms and letting the world naturally fall into orbit around your presence. They show that the most profound power often comes not from seeking it, but from embodying it so completely that others have no choice but to follow. If you found this insight eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share, because understanding Sigma influence is just the beginning of mastering the invisible forces that shape every room, group, and movement you're part of.